Teruvan Saranai. So today is our last part 4 of the Path to Nibbāṇa series. And could I please have the slides? Thank you. Okay, and then that background, if we can eliminate that, that'll be perfect. Thank you. So, as you know, this is our fourth and the final part. And as always, I like to share and kind of do a recap. And this is the steps, the practical steps we have to take to attain Nibbāṇa. So let's go into the recap. Attaining Nibbāṇa is training our mind to see things as they truly are. So this is a very simple and easily remembered way that you can understand what Nibbāṇa is. Training our mind to see things as they truly are. So, as we said, and as I keep emphasizing, the time to embark on this journey is now. And you have to stay focused, be patient, and yes, we can attain Nibbāṇa. And as you see towards the end, you will realize that it's all common sense. Again, as we go through the real meditation techniques, I personally think it's best to think in your native language. We went through the 4 stages, which is stream entry, once returner, non-returner, and Nibbāṇa. And in this journey, the very first step, which we all should take today, is to learn to be the best person you can be. How do we do that? Well, there's 2 parts. The first part is we have to have a healthy body, and that will help us go on this path, which is like, eat healthy food, smaller meals, get adequate rest, drink plenty of water, and reduce your responsibilities as much as you can, and avoid getting too much distractions like from your social media and all the negative news that we are getting through the TV. Then, of course, there's a spiritual part where for us as lay people, the easiest thing is the 5 precepts. We talked about that at length in part 1. And that is the first step, which is training to be the best person you can be. And that's a lifelong effort that you have to make. The second thing is to train our mind to be the best tool. And basically, most of the time, our mind is like a stormy ocean. And what we want as we embark on this journey is to create a mind like a calm lake. Okay, because it is the mind that we are going to use in order to go on this journey. So, calming the mind is done by a form of meditation called samatha meditation. And we discussed a few of those techniques, I believe, in part 1 or 2. And then comes the most important part, which is observing our mind, our own mind, and then trying to figure out is what we learned as theory is really true. So that is a form of contemplation of what you saw. And that is called vipassana. So when we do the vipassana meditation, we have to first understand a few concepts. We have done some of those in the previous 3 parts. And then we have to be like scientists and truly observe our own mind and make your own conclusions that what we learned as theory is accurate. The third part of this journey is to keep repeating these new habits that you learned, and that way you will continue to train your mind, and that is how we attain Nibbāṇa. So one of the first concepts we learned was that we are made out of 2 parts. One was our mind and the other was our body. And then we went on to learn that our body is really made out of 4 parts. Again, this is one place where I personally think we should use our own native language once you understand the concepts when you contemplate. So what are the 4 parts? Solids, liquids, air, and energy. Then we went on to realize that yes, it's not only me, everyone else in this world, all human beings and all living beings have the same 4 parts. So air, water, solids, energy, or solid, liquid, air, energy, whatever. So it's 4 parts. And then if we pause for a moment and then look at something like a tree, that too has the same 4 parts, but the proportions are different. Same with any inanimate object that you can think of, the whole earth and the whole universe. They are all made out of these 4 parts. That was one of the first things that we learned. And then we went and spent a lot of time in part 3 learning about the mind. And these are the summary of those things that we discussed. One is that we can only have one thought at a time, and that they are constantly changing. Okay? And then we went even deeper, trying to understand exactly how does our mind see a yellow rose. A yellow rose, as we said, was some data from the outside world. So there could be many things, but we just took the rose as an example. So whatever the data that comes from the outside is received by our 6 sense organs. And then in the Buddhist philosophy, we learned that the mind is also considered a sense organ to receive thoughts. Okay? And then we went through that as we get some data, it is accepted by consciousness or vijnana, and that is interpreted by sanya or perception, and then vedana or feelings decides to put that data into 3 categories, which is pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So these are the 3 trays that he is in charge of. But the most important thing we learned is that this process is a continuous process that ends. So basically we get data, it's processed, and then it's gone. We get more data, that is processed, and then it's gone. So that way we learned that this whole process, which is consists of the 5 aggregates, are impermanent or transient and are constantly changing. Now you heard this ad nauseum, but now you have a kind of an understanding in a simplified way what this really means. Okay? But if you are not interested in that part, which is really not important, all we have to realize is our thoughts and the processes that happen in our mind are not permanent, and that they are constantly changing. So everything in our body, and then we learned about the body, about the 4 elements, and now we learned about how the mind works. So today, which is the final part, we will talk about a few concepts and extend our meditation and complete the modules that we have to do, as well as I want to give you an introduction into what Buddhist mindfulness is. Okay, so the first concept today we are going to understand, and it has many words, anatta, anicca. I prefer the word constantly changing world, or you could say impermanence. Now, it is not rocket science. If we pause for 1 second, we can see it among us, right? Even us. Remember, like our baby photographs, well, they are very different from what we look like today. And if you think of a loved one who passed on, we do know how they age, and that invariably one day we will die, right? And how do we die? Well, something that is vital, a vital organ like the heart will stop, and then we will die. And then when we die, what happens? Our bodies somehow will become part of Mother Earth. There are different ways that we dispose of our body, but this is a fact that we all know. So it's not rocket science to say that our body is impermanent and is constantly changing. Now, if we pause and look at a tree, the same thing happens. A tree is also constantly changing, starts with a seed and then it grows and grows and finally becomes very old and then it dies off. Even an inanimate object like a chair will invariably, come to an end, as does the Mother Earth and the universe. We know that from science. And if some of you all have done science, like learned about cells, well, then they even have a shorter lifespan. And then even an inanimate objects, because everything, scientifically speaking, is made out of molecules, and they have atoms, and then the electrons around us. These things are constantly changing. So constant change is a fact about the universe. So, conclusion, everything is impermanent and everything is constantly changing. You could describe it in multiple levels, but the conclusion is what's critical for us. Now let's look at another concept, which is dukkha. Now, the easiest way we can comprehend this is to think of a little child building a sand castle. What happens? Well, they'll make a beautiful sand castle, and then when a wave comes and then destroys the thing that they made, the little child will start crying, right? Because he's sad. Now, we as adults, we will not cry when we see a sandcastle being destroyed. Why? Because we know that it's an inevitable thing. So we are not going to get too attached to a temporary thing called like a sandcastle. Simple, common sense. So the child cries because the child doesn't know that a sandcastle is impermanent, whereas we know it. So we accept it. So when the waves come and then destroy it, we don't start crying. Now think for a moment. What did we just learn? We learned that everything in this universe is constantly changing and is impermanent. So what happens to us? Well, we want things to be the same. So expecting things to be the same in a world that is constantly changing, if you really pause for a second, is a very foolish thing to do, right? And that is what gives us the stress and suffering. So remember the sandcastle. Remember how we looked at a sandcastle. Well, then, that is the way we have to look at the whole world, ourselves, our body, our mind, and everything around us. Such a simple and common sense thing to realize. Now comes the aha moment, because if we can train our minds to see things as they truly are and realize that this body, our mind, our body, all our friends, and everything else in this universe is constantly changing. And if we can train our mind to see that every second, well, then we'll be looking at everything like sandcastles. So when they change, there won't be any stress and suffering, right? So that is the main thing what we are going to do, because when we achieve that state, when we train our mind to see things as they truly are, we will stop suffering and having stress. Now that is the why that you have to know as we embark on this journey. Remember, in the very first part we talked how important the why is, because that is what is going to help us to go on this journey. Okay. And Lord Buddha mentioned that in the Four Noble Truths. Now you have a real clear understanding of impermanence at different levels. You can contemplate it at different levels, including the level of 5 aggregates. And therefore, you could say, okay, and if I can train my mind to see things as they are, then I will not have stress and suffering. Now comes another concept. So we learned now lots of concepts. Okay. And now as we learn each concept, it is useful for us to realize how do we add that to our meditation. Remember, we talked about it as a modular thing, and I could share 2 methods. The first one is what I personally like to contemplate, which is think of one of your baby pictures, and then when you are growing up in university, so on and so forth, and really realize that yes, this body has constantly changed, right? And then think of a loved one that has passed on. For me, it'll be my mother that I often think of, and realize what happened to her body. You know, we cremated it and then dispersed the ashes, and the ashes became part of Mother Earth. So that is the story of our body. It's a impermanent entity. So contemplating and showing your mind that this is the truth is what we do as that module of our meditation. Now, there's another couple of methods which doesn't help me, but please, you need to try them and see which one works for you. So one of them is you remember the Anapanasati or the breath meditation. So you see the breath go in and then it comes out. So as you observe it, you realize that even the breath is an impermanent thing, because it goes in and then comes out. So even that is impermanent. Another example would be as you are meditating, if you really pay attention, you start hearing a sound. It will be received by our ear, it will be interpreted by our mind, and then it's gone. So even there, you can see that that particular incidence was also an impermanent one. So these are the different methods you could use. I personally prefer the first one about contemplating about my own impermanence and thinking about someone who had passed on. Okay, now we are going to learn two more concepts, and that is Sakaya Ditti and Anatta or Anatma or all kinds of names, but I'm going to just call it Anatta. So let's first look at Sakaya Ditti. If we pause for a moment and just look at yourself or think, say your name out loud if you are in a place where you can do that, and you'll get this sense that there is this big boss called me inside, like managing everything. That is the sense we all have as we embark on this journey. So that we feel like there is a boss called me inside this unit of our mind and body. Okay, now I want you to pause for a second and really think, is this really true? Okay, again, just look at and visualize your brain. Is there some kind of a person called me inside the brain, the structural brain? How about the face? How about the chest, abdomen, arms, legs? Do you really see a boss call me in any of these places? You don't. Okay? And now we are a little bit more advanced in our thinking, because I think it's in part 1 or 2 we realize that this body is just made out of 4 elements. So even there, if you had been doing the meditation, you by now realizes, yep, there is no one, no boss call me in the physical body. How about the mind? Well, we also learned how to look at the mind, right? So now, if you really think about these thoughts, one thought comes, it disappears, another one comes, so on and so forth. Is there some kind of a boss called me in there, in those thoughts? And if you pause for a second, it is common sense that there is no such thing either. Okay? So, then you have to pause and think, what is this thing that we keep feeling? We all have this sense like there is somebody inside us that's like controlling things. And where is that hiding? Now, we actually objectively looked at our body, we objectively look at our mind, and then we learned also how to look at our feelings, our thoughts, everything. We now objectively look at all these places one by one, and we don't see a boss call me anywhere. That's when you realize it's really something our mind made up, and it is really a collection of thoughts. It's really a collection of thought. So once you yourself has done this experiment and observed your body, observed your mind, observed your feelings, you will come to that conclusion. So that conclusion is, we are absolutely right. There is no permanent entity called me, either in our brain, either in our mind, or in our body. Okay? This concept or the illusion or the wrong view that we carry every day is called Sakaya Ditti. Ditti means view, and this Sakkaya Ditti is a wrong view. And it is so easy to theoretically understand what this means, and then you have to do the contemplation and actually observe your mind and make a conclusion about that. Then you will have completed the realization that this is a wrong view, that there is no permanent entity called me inside us. So once you realize that, you have entered the first stage, which is called stream enterer. Okay, out of the four, that is how you enter the first stage. And then, if you remember at the very first part in our introduction, we talked about three things that a person who has entered the stream entry has to eliminate. And in those three, the first one is Sakkaya Ditti. Okay, so in another way, if I were to say it in another way, remember there were three steps that we had to go through when we were going through this process. First, you had to understand the theory. The second, so in this case, the theory is that there is no permanent boss called me in my body or in my mind. That is the theoretical concept. Next, what did we have to do? We had to calm our mind and then use that mind as a tool to observe your own mind and observe your own body. And when we did that, and you know how to do that now, when you do that, you get convinced that the theoretical concept that you learned, that there is no boss called me, becomes a fact. Okay? So once you get to that point and you see it and you are convinced, that's when we enter the stream entry phase. Okay? Then comes the hardest part of retraining our mind to see the world that way. All right. Now comes the concept of anatta. Now, we already know that there is no permanent entity called me inside our body, inside our mind, or inside our feelings. And that was called Sakkaya Ditti. And we eliminate that in stage 1 or stream entry. But the sense of self, that thing that tells us that there is a boss called me inside us, is extremely deeply embedded in our memory and our so-called database. I had one Buddhist priest tell me a really nice way to understand this. He said that if we light up a fire underneath a big rock and then we eliminate the fire, the heat from the fire will still be there in that rock. So you could understand it that even if you eliminated Sakkaya Dittiya, which is the understanding that yes, there is no boss called me, that heat, that sense is still there. And that disappears only when we attain Nibbāṇa, okay? That deeply embedded sense of me. Now, I'm going to please go back and look at that complicated how the mind work part of it. I'll try to summarize that because now you will start understanding these concepts better if I add that here. So we said, as you see in this slide, the red person in the center, that's our thought, right? The blue guys around that thought, They are called the chaitasikas, or companions to the thought. And we in part 3 learned that there's 52 of them. Then we went on to put them in 2 rooms. And just now I want you to focus a little bit on the second room, which was a large department called Department of Sanskara, right? And we talked about several people in that. And one of them was the boss, the illusionary boss called me. And now you will begin to understand what we were talking about in part 3. And what happened? It's as we went through the sequence, it's because the illusionary boss is there that Chetana exists. Chetana is desire. And it was because of the illusionary boss that, I made a mistake. Because of the illusionary boss is why desire, which is tanha, exists. And it is because of the illusionary boss that chetana or volition exists. So if we retire that illusionary boss called me, these 2 guys will also retire. Okay? So that is the concept. The illusionary boss is the concept initially in Sakkaya Ditthi and in a more deeper sense in Anatta. Okay? Now, if we dive deeper in those 3, let's see. In this one, you have, as data comes in, consciousness accepts it. Then it goes to sanya for who's the person who decides what it is, right? When data comes in. So that is, we can look at it like a database. And in that database, this concept of me is deeply embedded. And that is what we are trying to eliminate. Okay, so that's another way for you to understand the concept of me. Now, hence the reason we have to keep showing our mind that this is a wrong concept, that there is no permanent entity called me in the body, that there is no entity called me in the mind, by those meditation modules we talked about, or as it is mentioned in Satipatthana Sutra, looking at the body is called Kayanupassana, and that's the 4, contemplating about the 4 elements. And then looking at the mind is called Chittanupassana. And then that is the third one was contemplating about our feelings. Okay, so that way you will realize that yes, there is no permanent entity called me. So for that, you have to keep practicing. And as I said, once the boss disappears, Chetana will disappear. And as the boss disappears, Tanha or craving will disappear. And once we completely eliminate that sense of self, now self is, eliminating that is what anatta is. Okay? So in another simplified way, you can say there's 2 errors in our database. One error is that we think that everything is permanent. And the second error is that there is a boss called me. So those are the 2 errors that we need to keep eliminating from our database. Okay? So once we have completely eliminated those 2 errors from our database, we attain Nibbāṇa. Okay? Now comes the thought, can we actually do this? Like, can we actually replace something that is so deeply embedded in us and then see whether we can replace it with another concept? Well, guess what? We do it all the time. So, this is the best example I could come up with. Let's say you had a friend called Miss Tina Smith. Okay, so she gets married and then she becomes Mrs. Tina Jones. Now, each time we see her, the first thought that comes to us is that this is Tina Smith. What do we have to do? We pause a moment and say, no, now she's called Mrs. Tina Jones. So if we had to introduce her to someone, that thought comes, Tina Smith. You pause inside and say, nope, I had to change that. It is really Mrs. Tina Jones. And then you say it out loud too as an introduction. This is Mrs. Tina Jones. Now, if you really think about it, that's basically we are going to do. Every time we start seeing something and the first thought that comes to us is, hey, this is a permanent situation. And then as we meditate and contemplate, slowly but surely, we will realize that no, there's nothing permanent. Everything is constantly changing. And then the other error in the database is no, there is no one permanent called me inside this unit, which is the body and the mind. That is the other correction we have to make. So if you remember in part 1, we talked about a new path and a new way of thinking. So the more you practice the new way, the old way will disappear. It's a simple thing as seeing your friend change their name. So extreme common sense. So that is why repeated contemplations are important. And another technique of repeating this and correcting this, which is what we have to do, can be done during Buddhist mindfulness. So that is my segue to Buddhist mindfulness. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about the meditation technique that we discussed in our previous parts. Again, a quick recap. You sit comfortably, be in a safe place, make sure all your urgent tasks are done for the day so that you can relax. Traditionally, we pay homage to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and then we recite the 5 precepts. And then I personally take a deep breath, let it out, and put all my worries and stresses aside, and more important, my things to do list that never ends, and say, okay, for the next 30 minutes, I am not going to think about those. So you have to make a determination like that because we are overwhelmed with stuff that we have to do. Then what do? We try to calm our mind. Now you will understand in the very first part and actually in the all 3 previous parts, I kept saying when you are doing your compassion meditation, try to say, may the brain be well, may the face be well, may the chest be well, so on and so forth. Now you understand why I said that. If you kept saying, may my brain be well, may my face be well, guess what? We keep training our mind to go on the wrong path. What we are trying to eliminate is this concept that there is a permanent boss called me inside us. So if we keep repeating that even during our meditation, it's going to defeat that purpose. So hence the reason I said, when you are trying to calm your mind and if you are using compassion meditation, please eliminate the word me and replace it with may the brain be well, so on and so forth. Okay. Or you could use something like the breath meditation. I do a little bit of both for about 2-3 minutes just to get my mind to be calm. You don't waste a lot of time trying to make it 100% calm, because then we will not get to the more important thing of vipassana meditation. So what is the first contemplation we make is about looking at our body as the four elements. Then we look at everyone else, a tree, an inanimate object, and the earth, and then do the same contemplation. Next, it's best as we are contemplating about our body to realize that our body is impermanent. Remember, I mentioned two methods. This is the one that I follow, where you look at it with your mind while you are meditating. Think about a photograph or something as childhood, and then when you are a young adult, and realize that yes, this body has been changing, and that think of someone who has passed on and realize that one day this body, our own body, will also end up dying. And then think of someone else, a tree, an inanimate object, and the earth, and then complete that contemplation about impermanence. Next, you have to contemplate about the mind and see. You already have seen that the thoughts come and they go. So you pause for a moment and acknowledge the fact, yes, thoughts are also impermanent and they are constantly changing. We talked about the fact that as data comes in, they are interpreted and then that process ends. So that too is a process that is impermanent. Then you pause for a second and contemplate the fact that thinking that, knowing now that we have actually realized that everything is impermanent, trying to if we can make ourselves think that they are impermanent, we will end stress and suffering, and that it's really a foolish thing to think that these things are impermanent. Yes, these things are permanent. Now comes the last module, which is to show your mind whether there is a boss called me hiding somewhere. So while you are meditating, you direct your mind. And the important thing is this is not a chant, okay? You are actively contemplating. Please understand, this is not a chant. So you actively direct your mind to see, is there a boss called me hiding somewhere? First, look at the brain and then see, no, there is no one hiding there. Then the face, the chest, so on and so forth. Same thing. You look at your mind, you look at your thoughts and see, is there someone permanent hiding there? And the conclusion will be no. This is another technique because by now your mind is very quiet. So you can watch your mind and direct your mind to say things. So this is like inside you, in your mind, you just say something like, I, pause for a second, am, pause for a second, and then say your name. And then you start noticing, wow, these are just thoughts. And that is how we get this concept of me. Or you could say, I am a doctor, lawyer, housewife, student, whatever. And then you begin to see, it's fascinating that these are just thoughts. You could say something, this is my home. So this is another method that you could use towards the end. And this was first described by Venerable Ajahn Sumedho. So now you have all the modules that you need to do in order to contemplate about these concepts. Remember, we said that there are two methods that we could use to repeat the contemplation. One is during meditation, which is vipassana meditation, and then the other one is day to day when you're running around. And that is done by Buddhist mindfulness. That is a big lecture by itself, but I'm just going to summarize a few easy concepts that you can grasp. To me, Buddhist mindfulness is very different from what is being taught by the Western world. And to me, Buddhist mindfulness is like a Swiss Army knife. It's a tool that we can use at different stages of this process. Okay? So this is two words that you would have heard all the time, which is called Sati Sampajana. And we'll take our little Miss Tina Smith, Mrs. Tina Jones example. And what you see is, first you see Miss Tina Smith, right? So you see the image, and immediately from the database comes the name Tina Smith. Now, you realize that's the thought that came, Miss Tina Smith. That awareness is what is called sati. Okay? Then what do? These are thoughts that are coming in, right? Then you say, oops, no, she got married. Now she has a name, and the new name is Mrs. Tina Jones. That is the correction that your mind made, but the mind made that correction because it was aware that the first thing that came to your mind was Miss Tina Smith. And that's what prompted you to make the correction of Mrs. Tina Jones, right? That correcting part is called sampajana, or analytical awareness and correction. Okay? First you became aware of your thought, then you made the correction, and that is what sati sampajana means. Now, when I first started on this journey, one of the things was, I could never comprehend why in the Satipatthana Sutra they talked about like being aware of the movements of your body, because frankly, it had got nothing to do with anything that that's the way I thought initially. But then I realized we have to start with baby steps. So hence the reason, knowing the positions of your body, and they talk about 4 positions: seated, standing, walking, and lying down. That is a baby step or a baby training before we can embark on this big complicated sati sampajana stuff. So try to, do a little bit of this awareness thing, and the more you do it, the better you will become. Okay, now let's talk about Buddhist mindfulness, and one of the ways we can use it is learning to be the best person you can be. And what that means is, we'll take something like a mosquito biting you. The very first thing is we get that sensation into our mind and we realize, okay, a mosquito is biting. And what is the action? Is like your thing is to try and kill it, right? But then sampajana kicks in and says, oops, no, that's not a kind thing to do. Therefore, you shouldn't do that. So that is the part that stops it. and then you just like touch it so that it flies away, right? That is how you can use this concept of sati sampajana in your day-to-day life in observing your 5 precepts and trying to be a better person every day. Number 2 is, remember we learned that there were multiple concepts and then we had to observe like scientists to realize, are these really true? So, especially a thing like, if you hear a sound, you heard it in your ear, but it's really the mind that made the interpretation. So, things like that you could do during your day to day life, and that is another form of another way you could use Buddhist mindfulness in this journey to confirm the theoretical aspects you learned, like a sound coming in, right? And the third thing you could do, of course, is the most important and the more difficult one, which is retraining the mind about the 2 main errors in our database, which is what? Impermanence and sense of self, right? These are the 2 that the new concepts that we need to introduce into our database and eliminate the 2 wrong things that we have in our database, which is that things are permanent and there is a permanent boss called me inside us. Okay, so that is another way that you can, each time those things come, you have to pause and say, nope, it is not permanent. Okay, so that is how you use this concept of sati sampajana. All right, so that is the end of my conversation with you. I have made a series of smaller versions of this so that they are like 10 to 20 minutes, and they are at tinyurl.com/path to Nibbāṇa. So that one of the things that I really want to emphasize is, anytime we hear something for the first time, our retention is around 35%. So you have to listen to something many times before you can grasp what is being said. So please don't jump from place to place. Rather, find a good set of instructions and listen to them over and over again. The ones that I made at the ones that are at this URL is listen to them frequently, please. All right. One other simple thing, and then we will open for Q&A, which is a question about, am I making progress? Okay. One of the things you will notice as their frequency of thoughts are reduced. So that's one way you will know that you are making progress. And the other thing that will happen is that you will have less greed and desire, less anger. So overall, you have a better sense of well-being. And then much later, you will start seeing, a separation of mind and body. So that is the last comment I had to make. And now I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay. Even our neurotic tendencies are just being driven by the false idea of me. And therefore, those tendencies too are just occurring due to past causes. You are absolutely right. And hence the reason we will gain a lot of happiness if we actually train our mind to see things as they are. So I agree with that. Yes. Next question. Can you explain the concept of mindfulness in the context of path to Nibbāṇa, and how does it contribute to the spiritual progress? Good question. And I did try to answer that. So you remember we have 3 steps, right? The first one was trying to be the best person you can be, which is sila. And in that, that's the example I brought about the mosquito. So that is one very simple way you can use Buddhist mindfulness. But the more complicated way is anytime you experience anger, anytime you experience desire, anytime you think that something is permanent, anytime you think that there is a permanent entity called me, correcting it. Pause, correct. Pause, correct. The more you correct, the better you will become. So during your day-to-day life, keep using this, because the more you use it, the better you become. So that would be my answer for that. How does sticking to the practice of Noble Eightfold Path lead to stream entry? Good question. So basically, what we talk today is what is said in another way in the Noble Eightfold Path. If you Lord Buddha taught the same concepts in many ways to different people, and depending on their understanding, this is what it was said. So sila is like the third 3 of the noble eightfold path. So sila, samadhi, prajna are the 3 categories that we break it into. So sila is being the best person you can be. Samadhi has 2 complicated concepts, but the easy one is the samadhi we talked about at the beginning, trying to calm our mind. And then prajna is really contemplating and realizing the truth. So sila, samadhi, prajna is another way to outline the Noble Eightfold Path, and that's what we discussed today. Not today, in the last 4 parts. What about the Noble Eightfold Path, and how do they guide individuals on their journey towards Nibbāṇa? That is exactly what we just talked about. So sila is being the best person you can be. Samadhi has 2 concepts. The easy one is calming the mind and making the mind be the best tool it can be. And then the third is contemplation and achieving the wisdom that we need, and that is what the contemplation would lead to. When does detachment come in the path to enlightenment? To me, now this is me talking, I do believe it is a gentle process. And every day we practice, we start seeing the body as the 4 elements. We start seeing the mind as one that is impermanent and constantly changing. That is what leads us to see the world as a sandcastle. And the more we see the world as a sandcastle, the more we realize that there is really nothing that we need to get attached to. And then the third fact is, the more we realize that there is no permanent self called me or a permanent boss called me, who are we getting attached to? So these things, it's a journey. And as you go on this journey, your attachments become less and less and less. So, and you will experience it. These are not exotic things. This is pure common sense. So the more you practice, the more you will actually experience this. What role does meditation and insight play in the pursuit of Nibbāṇa? And how do they help in breaking the cycle of suffering? Okay. These 4 parts, what we did was we talked about modules of meditation. And if you do this, it takes, in a busy life, maybe like 30 minutes. But even if you spend 5 minutes doing this, and then throughout the day, let's say you're waiting for someone, just contemplating about these things, that's how you train your mind. It's the same way we train our mind to learn a song, the words of a song, or learn to play anything like a piano. This is the same concepts that we are using in order to train our mind to see things as they are. And that's what we talked about in the last 4 parts. So meditation and the word insight is understanding the concepts that we talked about. So if you go back and listen, you will see the different concepts. Well, then when you actually look at it during your meditation, that's how you attain Nibbāṇa. Thank you. It says wonderful lecture. So I'm happy that, and I sincerely hope, sorry. I think it's a blank one. Okay. So please listen to this and pause and think about it, because you do have to contemplate about the concepts and really understand them, without which you cannot go forward. So I believe it's 7 o'clock. So thank you so much for listening. And okay, I'm sorry, there is one more. Yes. Can you explain a little more about Atma, soul, self? Okay. So basically, that's, if you go back and listen to what we said, you will notice that there is no permanent entity within ourselves, in the body, in our mind, in the feelings, nowhere. And you are going to observe that. Okay. So then you can make that determination. And that is the most important thing. Me saying that stuff to you does not work. Once you understand the theory, look at your body, look at your mind, and then it becomes a no-brainer. So that will be the best way I could answer that question. What is the benefit of concentrating on breath in meditation? Is it to realize how thoughts end up eventually arising and to see through the whole process as not self? Okay. There are many ways, the breath meditation and concentrating on that is another Swiss Army knife tool. Basically, it can be used in many ways. So the way that I personally use it is to calm myself. You can use it before you give a lecture, you can use it during your daytime as well. But the whole purpose is at the beginning of the meditation, and please don't spend too much time doing this, is our mind is like a stormy ocean and we are trying to make it like a calm lake. So use it as a tool to calm your mind. That's number one. Then number 2 is remember as we take a breath and let it out, there is a beginning and an end. So it's another way that some people use it as a form of contemplation of impermanence. I personally, my training, I don't like that technique, but each person has to try it and see whether that can convince your mind about the impermanence of self. Okay, the breath came, the breath went out, and that's a sense it is really the end of that process. So that's another way that you could use the breath meditation or anapanasati, and there's a multiple sutra on that, but that's a simplified way of using it for that purpose. Oh, I'm so glad that I got this opportunity, and please don't wait. You have to do this soon. So Teruvan Saranai. As I said, it says, please encourage our audience to go along the path to Nibbāṇa. And I think I sincerely convinced you to start that journey today. Teruvan Saranai.